My name is Neal Goldsmith. I'm a psychologist here in New York City and out in Long Island, actually in Sag Harbor too. Um, I'm going to be talking about psychology, psychedelics, and the study of the soul. Basically, I'll define those terms first, and then I want to sort of talk about a developmental model for psychology. Then what goes wrong in our development, wrong in quotes perhaps. And then lastly, the solution, and part of that would be psychedelics in some cases. But before I do all that, I want to introduce myself. I want to tell you really why I'm here talking to you about this topic, about why I'm qualified to do so and what's brought me to do so on a personal level. So first of all, of course, I have a particular expertise in psychedelic research, therapy, policy. I don't conduct it. I want to be very careful about that. Please don't send me emails asking for psychedelic therapy or sources of psychedelics or psychedelic therapy, because I really don't do that. I couldn't be sitting here providing this information and talking in depth about psychedelics, which are illegal for personal use, with such fervor, really, and such detail, if I had a private psychedelics practice. So, I don't. And although I wish I could and will soon, I'm being trained, like some others are, to do psychedelic therapy. And well, the most recent psychedelics research that's been approved at NYU and Johns Hopkins includes components, and down in South Carolina as well, includes components for the therapists to be trained with active doses of the substance that they're about to administer in a research setting to subjects. So there's training programs now. There's one at the California Institute for Integral Studies. They have a Center for Psychedelic Therapy, Research and Therapies that has a certificate program. So there's lots of things going on, and we can talk. I'll talk perhaps a little bit more about that later on. But all of which is to say, I don't do psychedelic therapy right now. I have a background in technology innovation, in technology transfer and organizational change. All these things have to do with the use of the best of what is known, research-based decision-making and policy-making. That was what I did my dissertation on, policy research utilization. I do a lot of speaking on adult developmental psychology and psychotherapy and change, psychedelics, and the integral future of society that I think is coming down the pike. I'm kind of a short-term pessimist and a long-term optimist for our development as a society. So, when I was doing my dissertation in my earlier days, my focus was on action research, on applied social research, on planned change and utilization. And way back then, when I was at Princeton doing my dissertation, I would gather in the experts in that small field of research utilization, and we would have mini conferences where we'd present on our data. And so I've always been an inveterate collector and feeder of gurus. It's like herding cats sometimes, but it's a wonderful thing to bring in people who can talk about the state of the art, and that's another way to disseminate research information. I'm interested in the future of science. This is a list. The evolution of society, quantum mechanics, meditation, emergent properties, psychedelics, of course, cosmology, placebo effect, relativity, spontaneous remission, governance, stigmata. Look stigmata up. Artificial intelligence, healing, peak experience, psychosomatics, innovation, and just the spark of knowing insight. I'm trained in imago therapy and psychosynthesis and yoga psychotherapy and other regressive therapies. And so you should just sort of understand a little bit about who I am and my background. And I'm the author of the book, Psychedelic Healing, The Promise of Entheogens for Psychotherapy and Spiritual Development. Of course, while I don't do psychedelic psychotherapy, I use psychedelics in my personal life and have found them extraordinarily valuable. And not just valuable, but shaping, revealing in a way, shaping of my worldview, of my perspective on not just the universe, but also the way life works here on the planet, and then the way human development takes place, which is so important to psychology and being a psychotherapist. And then to see the sort of truer nature of the way we are. I'll give you I'll get to this a little bit later, but something I call the cartography of consciousness, which sort of lays out the way I view things. So you can think of, if the cartography is from here down to here, down to the perineum, the first chakra, the ground of your being, that you start out here with what I'm saying to you now, and then here is what I'm about to say that I know I'm about to say. And then thinking of the diaphragm as sort of a metaphor for the distinction between the subconscious and the conscious. Here's what I could say to you at any point. It's available to me. I could talk about the Boy Scouts if I wanted to. But then below this semi-permeable boundary, where you can see down a bit and a little bit percolates up, down here is the realm of dreams and the repressed feelings and whatnot, the overhanging rock outcroppings that block the light, the tectonic plates, the subterranean forces, or um, the currents below the surface of the ocean, all these wonderful metaphors. And for our psychology, I think of it sometimes as that trauma creates like a knot in the psychological muscle, this knot that then sort of distorts your perspective as you want to look straight down. It bends it off to the side. So this akin to gravitational lensing. So there's all these forces down below. And then below that, at the bottom, at the first chakra, the place between your genitals and your anus, the perineum, the bottom, the ground of your being, is your soul. Now, I spell the word soul with a small s. I kind of, make an issue of that to notice it, that it's not supernatural. That the soul, I'm a psychologist, I'm not religious. So for me, the soul is a word I like to use. It's so, it sometimes is a little too imbued with meaning, but it's got a wonderful sense of being the essence, the bottom. And for psychology, that's really what psychology is all about, studying the essence of us and getting back to the origins of psychology, of the word psychology. So psychedelics have shaped my worldview, and that's sort of a cartography of some of what happens. And then we can talk a little bit about the chronology, and that's what I want to talk about next. About developmental psychology. But before I get into that, I want to really define the term psychology. Now, it's a made-up word. You won't really find it in the dictionary. It's obviously from psyche and ology. And ology, we all know, is sort of the study of, although there's a little more to it than that. Ology is really a word related to logos, the meaning of the essence of words. And so, psychology is a neologism, a made-up word, a neologism. It's based on the Greek word, psyche is based on the Greek word for soul, pushke. It's also related to the word for breath, for breathing, which is, of course, perfect when you think about meditation and access to the soul and the connection to the breath makes perfect sense. So, if you think about psychology, psychology has its roots in that kind of philosophy, not in physical medicine, and more akin to spiritual philosophy. And there's been centuries during which psychology has tried to elevate itself from its roots. And, it's almost like a full circle, going from roots in spiritual philosophy through a more scientific or mechanistic approach, and then using that knowledge, but then coming back around to a more holistic perspective is what I'd like to try to facilitate with the use of that awkward word, psychology. So it's hard to pronounce, and so you notice it, and you may begin to remember and think about what the roots of psychology really were and are, and what healing and psychotherapeutic development or success or outcome is really about. Is it really about learning a technique or teaching the client, I say client because I don't take a medical perspective rather than patient, but is it really about teaching a technique or a particular school of thought? Well, perhaps, and attendance to a school of thought with sincerity and focus can be quite helpful, of course. But in my work, I find that the real healing process is about getting in touch with the very, very deepest part of us, that soul part with a small s. And that part, getting in touch with that, is a healing act in and of itself. It's alignment, realignment with your deepest, truest self, as opposed to your articulated psychology, the personality that you've adopted as a defense mechanism in collusion with your parents. So my work is really about getting down to the essence. And you can see in that philosophy something that's psychedelically inspired, this sense of essence, of the bottom of us, that one can observe through that cartography of consciousness, almost as if a psychedelic is like the light on the forehead of the miner's helmet, with that whatever you look at is illuminated. So if you look off at the mountain range, you see, the beauty, the perfection of nature. And if while you're doing that, you happen to notice your thumb and the opposable thumb, you think about the extraordinary beauty of evolution. And if you shine that light on yourself, if you do introspection, you see that cartography of consciousness. And you see through your psychology all the way down to one's essence, with the concept of ego death, for example, where your ego sort of dissipates and you are only pure essence. So for me, psychology is both the roots and the future of psychology and of psychotherapy, of clinical work. A different perspective, not a mechanistic Western approach, but more of an essential essence, fundamental soul type one. But again, spelt with a small s, because I want to make sure that this is, I'm not an Eastern person. I'm not going to become a Buddhist except philosophically, and I'm not a Southern person. I'm not going to, live in the Amazon. And all these concepts I'm talking about today are ones that are sort of fit the Venn diagram of my Western approach or my Western self or essence, that what I am now overlapped, that Venn diagram overlapped with Eastern or Southern philosophies. So I want to ask a few questions then, and see if we can answer them over the course of this talk. So it's about psychedelic therapy. So the psychedelics have an extraordinary reputation, of course, a scary one. If you ask people, tell me what LSD is like, for example, the average person will say, well, it's really potentially scary. I mean, that's kind of the first thing they'll say, dangerous, that it makes you think wacky thoughts, that and colors and lights, and it's kind of disorienting, and potentially like that. That's sort of, I think, the generic description of psychedelic, maybe by somebody who hasn't taken one. But for me, given that model of the miner's helmet light, those descriptions are the reaction to the action of psychedelics. That the true action of psychedelics is illuminative, clarifying. But when one is illuminating something that one's not ready to see, then one has to block it off or react to it, or in extreme cases dissociate, or have some sort of break from that reality, that inexorable drug-induced reality of observation, of illumination that you're going to experience. So those wacky thoughts and bright lights are, to me, the reaction to the action of psychedelics, not the action. The action is really illuminative. So nonetheless, there's a lot of expectations around psychedelics providing enlightenment or a cure for any kind of mental illness that you might want to mention. So let's ask these specific questions. Can psychedelic therapy repair malfunctions in natural development? So in the sense of psychology, if you have a traumatic experience, or if you've had a difficult childhood, can psychedelics repair that? Secondly, can psychedelic therapy speed up the natural development process? Let's say it's not about trauma or an event per se, but you just want to learn faster, advance faster. Can psychedelics do that? Take you down the path you would go, but sooner than you would naturally go down it. And so then third, can psychedelic therapy trigger immediate transformative change into a novel area, into some place that you wouldn't normally have developed without the psychedelic? So not just speeding up natural development. And there's lots of other questions, of course, like, for example, might psychedelics actually slow growth in the sense that making it easier to avoid the hard work of daily spiritual practices, to convince yourself you're doing something really good because you're taking a drug. I had a client come into me one time and said, gee, doc, I don't know why I'm so fucked up. I take LSD every single weekend. So, psychedelics, they called it LSD acid, and in part because it breaks things down. It was a good name that stuck. It comes from, of course, the chemical, Lysergic acid diethylamide. So it's an acid, but they are really corrosive to calcified mindsets, to barriers, and tend to make things, a little more transparent. A very, very helpful tool. But as with any tool, you have to actually do the work. With that miner's helmet analogy, for example, let's say you're in the mine and you're down at the, end at the front end of the mine, really where the coal is. And you see that seam of coal on the wall. Now you've got your miner's helmet, you see it so clearly. You see what your work is, what you have to do, right? And so you say to your helmet, so, okay, have at it, and you sort of stand there waiting for your illumination to mine the coal. And eventually the helmet says, hey, pick up the pickaxe and start doing your work. Because all I'm doing is showing it to you with clarity. But now you have to do the next steps. And frequently the next steps is some kind of, like, not next steps per se, but integrated, some kind of spiritual practice, psychotherapy or slash spiritual practice. And I think once one has maybe done some psychotherapy enough in conjunction with psychedelics, after all, it's not really psychedelic therapy, it's psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. So when one's done psychotherapy enough to be able to be open to it, the sort of natural counterpart to psychedelics is meditation. So, either one of those two things alone is not as effective as the two together. Not at the same time necessarily, although that's perfectly fine. But as an integrated practice, it's a daily practice of meditation, interspersed with episodic psychedelic experiences that are quite illuminating. However, in many cases, because of our psychology and the way our social systems are built, and the way the culture as a whole is built, disappointingly in some ways, that we come back after a psychedelic experience and tend to get remolded back into the way we were. And the insights that we might have seen, which are so sort of outre and countercultural to the way our lives are, tend to be forgotten or buried or dissipate or just be distracted by everything else. And so it's important to sort of hold those insights in place long enough for your life to change, for you to change your life. And so that's, in a way, what meditation does. So you can think of it like if you had a wonderful psychedelic experience on a Saturday, and then on Sunday, let's say you're writing in your diary all day about this wonderful thing. If you go back to work on Monday, by Friday, you kind of forgot everything. But if on Monday morning you spend some time now meditating, but I use the word in a very specific way. I don't really mean meditation in the traditional Eastern philosophical way, where you're trying to empty your mind, or I'm not going to denigrate that, at least not right now. Maybe in a bit I will. But right now, as a psychologist, what I'm asking one to do in conjunction with psychotherapy is to reminisce, to remember, to refocus on the insights that one had on Saturday. So Monday morning, then, wow, you sit there quietly, think in a quiet, unconstrained way, loose clothing, not tired, not having just eaten, things like that. And you say, well, let me think about Saturday, and you think about, and you, oh wow, yes, that thought I had about my sister. Oh, I almost forgot that, but then you don't forget it, and you come back from work on Monday evening, and you spend the same time doing the same thing, and therefore you sort of hold things in place long enough to put roots down. The analogy here is, let's say you have a dune. That's your sort of edifice that's protecting the coastal houses, and a storm comes along and washes it away, right? So you say, all right, well, let me put it back in place, and I'm going to put it in a configuration that I think is better. So I'll put like dune grass in place to hold it into this new. That's my psychedelic insights. And so that's great, because now I've got a new system, a new configuration. Well, a storm comes along the next week and washes it away, and it's gone, both dune and dune grass. So this time you bulldoze back up the dune. You plant the dune grass again. You have your psychedelic insights. You configure it the way you want. And then you put that ugly orange netting on top of it that holds it all in place. That's meditation, daily practice. And after a while, once the psychedelic roots have dug down and it's a stable system, you may not need that particular meditative practice anymore. But so meditation and psychedelics kind of go together. Like, psychedelics without meditation is ephemeral, this insights. And but meditation without psychedelics is kind of like blind in a way. Like, Einstein had a wonderful phrase about religion and science. He said, science without religion is blind, because religion is so illuminating. But religion without science is lame, can't walk, because science is so mechanistically effective. Well, with psychedelics and meditation, it's sort of the same way. Psychedelics without meditation is lame, can't really get the daily traction that one needs to put it into place in one's life. But meditation without psychedelics is blind, because you don't have that brilliant clarity that the psychedelics offer too. So the two really, really go together well.